Our top story, the US says it's prepared for more strikes against Syria after firing 59 missiles at one of the country's key air bases. The attack on Friday killed at least 9 civilians and 5 Syrian soldiers. Moscow's described the strike as aggression against a sovereign state and warned of grave consequences now for the Middle East.
Our military destroyed the airfield from which this week's chemical strike took place. We were fully justified in doing so.
We see it as a violation of international law and as an act of aggression.
Beyond any doubt that the Syrian regime has used chemical weapons against its own people multiple times.
We said, show us the evidence. Specialists will decide whether it's true or not.
Strengthening Assad will only lead to more murders.
Once again, the Syrian army is and continues to be the main anti-terrorist force.
The Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons has only begun its investigation, but U.S. officials have expressed certainty that Bashar Assad carried out the chemical attack and that President Trump did not need anybody's authorization, neither of the UN Security Council nor of the U.S. Congress. American allies on the Security Council backed President Trump's decision to bomb the Syrian airbase after the fact. Moscow said it believes on April 4th, the Syrian Air Force bombed a warehouse near Idlib where terrorists held their chemical weapons. As an example of what can happen when a country takes military action without waiting for results of an investigation, Bolivia's ambassador to the UN brought the images of America's presentation of Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction in 2003, which turned out to be false.
I believe that we must remember these pictures. In this very hall, we were told that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and this was the motivation for the invasion. It launched a series of atrocities in the region. Would we be talking about ISIL and attacks in various parts of the world if this illegal invasion didn't take place?
In the meantime, Ambassador Haley said the U.S. is prepared to do more in Syria, suggesting that there may be more military action against Syrian forces.
A senior U.S. official says Washington has launched a probe into whether Russia is linked to a recent suspected chemical attack in Syria's Idlib province. Pentagon official says the government is assessing any information that would indicate the Russians knew or assisted with the attack in the Syrian town of Khan Sheikhoun last Tuesday. U.S. military officials had earlier claimed that a drone, allegedly Russian or Syrian, was spotted over the town after the incident. Washington claims the suspected chemical attack was carried out by the Syrian government. Damascus and Moscow have strongly dismissed the allegation.
According to Reuters, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani called on Saturday for an impartial probe of this week's suspected chemical weapons attack in Syria. Rouhani also warned that U.S. missile strikes in response risk escalating extremism in the region. Rouhani said during a speech on Saturday, "We're asking for an impartial international fact-finding body to be set up to find out where these chemical weapons came from." Tehran is Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's main regional ally and has provided military and economic support for his fight against rebel groups and Islamic State militants.
Iran, a staunch ally of the Syrian government, was quick to slam the U.S. airstrike. These worshippers chanted death to America and death to its Saudi allies, encouraged by the cleric leading the Friday prayers. I'd say America is crazy for these crimes and these missile attacks against Syria, which have also been happening in the past continuously, and the chemical weapons they gave to the terrorists, he said.
On Saturday, North Korea's foreign ministry responded to the U.S. missile strikes against Syria by calling them an unforgivable act of aggression. The response was the first since U.S. warships launched dozens of missiles at a Syrian airbase that was allegedly involved in a chemical weapons attack earlier in the week. In response, North Korea, which considers Syria a key ally, said that its decision to develop nuclear weapons was the right choice a million times over.
Prompting a Russian official to take a dig at the West, British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson has canceled a planned trip to Russia because of fast-changing developments in Syria. Following a chemical weapons attack on civilians and the U.S. airstrikes targeting a military airfield, Johnson said Saturday the situation in the war-torn nation had fundamentally changed. Tensions between Moscow and Washington have escalated. Johnson said he would no longer visit Moscow on Monday. His priority now was to continue contact with the United States and other nations in the run-up to the G7 meeting next week.
President Trump's order to target that Syrian airbase has sparked an anti-war demonstration in London and also dozens of protests across the state.
Today we say a war no more.
We voted for him because he promised that he's not gonna be the policeman for the world. He's not gonna go against the Syrian army. He's gonna make America great again, and he's gonna stay within America.
U.S. imperialist, #1 terrorist. U.S. imperialist.
This is one more war based on a total lie, as every past U.S. war has been.
It's always the case that a country gets accused of something and then the U.S. jumps in and bombs that country without any investigation or any due process.
I think it just risks escalating a conflict in which there really isn't a solution that we seem to be aiming for.
We have a right to be here and call out this fascist attack. Trump doesn't give a damn about the children of Syria.
And I just want to say that this rally, which is against the continued escalation of intervention of the United States in Syria, is one of actually over 40 around the country.
Syrians don't want war. My friends in Syria that I talk to every day, they don't want war. They never asked to be killed, tortured, or murdered.
The anti-war demonstrations saw authorities make a small number of arrests at least. 2 people were reportedly detained in New York, while clashes between police and protesters also broke out in Jacksonville, Florida. Fat protests there turned violent when pro-Trump supporters arrived at the scene. Officers were forced to intervene, separate the 2 groups. As a result, 6 people were arrested, 1 person hospitalized with severe injuries.
Russia has deployed a cruise missile-armed warship to Syria following a recent U.S. strike on a military base near the Syrian city of Idlib. The Admiral Grigorovich is set to arrive at the Mediterranean coastal city of Tartus. The frigate returned to the Mediterranean after participating in a Russian-Turkish naval exercise in the Black Sea. The ship carries 8 cruise missiles, a missile self-defense system, anti-aircraft guns, and torpedoes. Russian officials say the warship will operate in the region in accordance to the changing military situation there.
A US-led coalition airstrikes reportedly hit a village in Raqqa province now today. It's left at least 15 civilians dead. Local journalist Mohammed Ali told me more.
The latest is that there are reports from both government state media and also some of the opposition media, both confirming that there was an airstrike by the US-led coalition targeting Hneida village, which is about 30 kilometers from the Al-Raqqa, the main stronghold for Daesh, ISIL, in the northern part of Syria. The airstrikes, according to the reports, killed at least 15 civilians. Of course, this village is under the control of ISIL. However, the airstrikes killed civilians once again. Those US-led airstrikes killed 15 civilians, according to the reports coming out, as I told you. This is not the first time that US-led coalition airstrikes lead to the death of civilians. Just on last March, there was also a similar US airstrike that hit Al-Mansoura village, particularly a school that used to house displaced civilians. There were about more than 23 civilians killed at that time too. Definitely, we're seeing an increase in the number of civilian deaths as a result of US-led coalition.
The battlefields of Syria look and sound just the same after the US cruise missile strikes. There's little doubt, though, that the American action has inwardly shaken Syrian government forces as they continue air raids and ground attacks. It's what happens next that perplexes everyone, especially those who lose out most in the fighting, the civilians. Saturday saw hundreds more leaving Al-Wa'a, the besieged district of Homs, a city that was one of the focal points of the revolution. Now it's in the final stages of a surrender. The opposition calls this forced displacement, ethnic cleansing. The government describes it as a reconciliation agreement. Less than 40 kilometers south, what's left of the Shayrat air base marks a new milestone in this war. The next move may well be decided by foreign powers.
A day of mourning for Sweden. flags at half-mast on government buildings for the dead and the survivors of a truck attack at this usually busy shopping district. The Prime Minister who visited the scene called it an act of terror.
This is a moment for sorrow, for grief. That's what we're doing today. And we grieve with the families that have lost their loved ones, near ones. But we're also determined to continue to be an open society, a democratic society. And that is something I'm totally confident that the Swedish people also feel.
The shock brought on by the attack has compelled people to come here to the site to lay down flowers and create an impromptu shrine. But also what's in people's minds here is how devastating these attacks with vehicles can be. In custody, a 39-year-old man from Uzbekistan already known to the security services. Police have confirmed they found a device in the vehicle he's suspected of hijacking and ramming into the building of a department store. He was apprehended in a suburb in northern Stockholm late on Friday night. So far, the suspect has not spoken to law enforcement officials. It is not known if he acted on his own or with others, but appears similar to the recent attack in London by the Houses of Parliament. For the security services in Sweden, the attack may be shocking but not altogether a surprise. Their latest report into possible threats had suggested that if there were such an attack, it would most likely have been undertaken by a lone perpetrator. The latest in a series of low-grade vehicle attacks with devastating consequences.
Look at a city like Bilbao and it's hard to imagine there was ever a conflict here. But for years and years, a low-grade armed campaign claimed hundreds of lives. Yet now, places like the city's renowned Guggenheim Museum demonstrate just how much things have changed. Those closest to ETA say the weapons are going, and they're going for good.
No, there are no weapons after today. It's credible. That's not me saying this or ETA. There are going to be observers from civil society and Basque institutions in Spain and France.
How ETA got here is the fascinating part. To begin with, the protests against the dictatorship and human rights abuses of the Franco era, it carried on in support of Basque independence, even after democracy was born in Spain. But over the last 20 years, the Basque country developed an economic model which encouraged wealth redistribution and social justice. They have language rights and control their own taxes and spending. The whole region has grown wealthy. Several academics explained to the separatists that their idea of violence to achieve their goal no longer fitted. ETA lost its own constituency.
Normally, organizations like ETA would never respond in this way. And in our case, I think we really need to look at how civil society, how the Basque society has been demanding the end of violence, at the same time that it was demanding also a political solution.
ETA has handed over weapons before to the same outside mediators who are observing their disarmament. But this, after several years of ceasefire, feels very much like the end of the road.
A Mexican newspaper has printed its final edition. The decision to close came after reporter Miroslava Breach's death in Chihuahua City.
This week, a newspaper in Mexico's Ciudad Juarez called El Norte published its final edition, shutting down its printing presses. The reason given had nothing to do with digital technology or slumping ad revenues, the things newspapers around the world are struggling against. The owner said he was closing his paper after 27 years because continuing to report the news in Mexico is just too dangerous. The most recent journalist killed there was Miroslava Breach, a correspondent for the national paper La Jornada, who was shot dead by an assailant who left a note at the scene which read, "For being a loudmouth." Breach was one of 3 journalists killed in March, all of whom were reporting on crime, corruption, or the drug trade. Mexico is the deadliest country in the Western Hemisphere to report from. And what galls journalists there is that the murders of their colleagues routinely go unpunished. Charges are few, prosecutions are rare, and convictions almost never happen. That culture of impunity has many in the media theorizing that the police and the prosecutors who should be targeting drug barons are in fact working for the wrong side. And many media outlets in Mexico, El Norte included, are financially dependent on state governments for lucrative advertising contracts, which means that they may be compromised in their work as well. Between the conflicts affecting the various players, allegations of official corruption, the ever-present threat of violence from the drug cartels, and the mounting death toll, there's a surplus of news stories in Mexico and one fewer newspaper to report on them.
Google is stepping up to combat the rise of fake news. The world's leading search engine is installing its own fact checker on search results that might generate a lot of misinformation. It works like this. If you look up a rumor like, does John Podesta, Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman, worship the devil, you'll get all the normal results, including links to conspiracy-promoting websites like InfoWars. But Google will also present a fact check from one of its trusted partners like Snopes, offering the truth while giving the origin and some context. The John Podesta rumor started on InfoWars after it was revealed he had dinner with a performance artist who published a book called Spirit Cooking. Google said in a blog post, quote, "The amount of content confronting people online can be overwhelming, and unfortunately, not all of it is factual or true, making it hard for people to distinguish fact from fiction." And Google isn't the only tech company that's had a hard time dealing with false or misleading stories. Facebook is also making some changes after taking a lot of heat over fake news. In August 2016, Facebook fired the editorial team in charge of its trending topics feature. The algorithm used to replace that team regularly presented satire, conspiracy theories, and made-up articles as real news. So the social media giant is adding an educational tool for trending articles. It's still an open question whether these tools will be enough to convince people not to trust fake news websites.
Brazil's top court has banned police from striking. The Supreme Court ruled 7-3 that federal and civil police are banned from going on strike. The April 5th decision included several other public positions, including firefighters, according to the Rio Times. Police strikes aren't unusual in Brazil, but the state of Espírito Santo suffered in February when murder rates went up and more than 100 people died during a massive police strike. Espírito Santo was hit hard during Brazil's recession. Police officers and other public employees were subject to prolonged pay freezes, and some public services were suspended. Police went on strike to protest the pay freezes. In its decision, the court said police and other individuals whose work relates to public security aren't allowed to strike because their jobs are essential to maintain public order. The court compared a state where police can strike to a state of anarchy.
Scuffles have broken out during protests in Johannesburg, one calling for the resignation of President Jacob Zuma and another in support of the leader. More than 60,000 people marched through the South African city in what were largely peaceful rallies. However, at least 4 people were wounded after police fired rubber bullets at demonstrators who were attacking others with stones, a police spokesperson told reporters. Zuma's presidency has been plagued by crisis, with the latest being triggered by a cabinet reshuffle.
Chinese state media breathed a sigh of relief on Saturday, cheering the meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping. According to Reuters, China has assessed the meeting as one that showed the world that confrontation between the two powers was not a foregone conclusion. The official China daily newspaper said it was encouraging to see the two-day summit that ended on Friday going as well as it could, considering Washington's previous confusing signals about how it was approaching the U.S.-China relationship. Trump spewed strident anti-China rhetoric during his campaign. Following his election, but before taking office, he'd also managed to infuriate Beijing by talking to the president of Taiwan. Taiwan is the self-ruled island Beijing claims as its own. However, diplomatic gaffes were avoided at the Mar-a-Lago meet, and China Daily said both parties appeared equally enthusiastic about the constructive relationship they have promised to cultivate.
There is no let-up in the flow of patients to quarantine centers in Sokoto, northern Nigeria. Patients lie on the concrete floors and in the corridors. Here, every little space counts. Muhammad Bello's 18-year-old brother has just died.
We brought him yesterday evening, and at one point last night we thought he was getting better. Then this morning he got worse. He died 30 minutes ago.
As soon as he sends off his brother's body for burial, Mohammed quickly returns to the ward to care for his other brother, who also has meningitis. For the first time, Nigeria is facing an outbreak of the most severe type C meningitis strain. Symptoms include high fever, stiffness of the neck, difficulty walking, and slurred speech.
The biggest challenge has been the virulence, that is the severity of the disease itself. It kills very fast, in a matter of hours.
Relatives of patients are appalled at conditions at the hospitals and the quality of treatment. The meningitis outbreak in Nigeria has pushed an already weak healthcare system into intensive care. Medical workers say the strain of meningitis affecting Nigerians is resistant to the vaccine often used for preventing the spread of the disease. And that might explain why there have been so many deaths this year.
Growing designer babies and bringing back the woolly mammoth. Once fiction, but now a looming reality for scientists who are steps away from building artificial life. Experts meeting in London this week said the cost of synthesizing DNA was now much less prohibitive.
When I first started teaching at MIT, building 1 letter of DNA from scratch cost $4 US a letter. Today it's 4 cents a letter. And the consequence of that is I used to order designs for my students, say 20,000 base pairs of DNA. This spring, I'm ordering 10 million base pairs of DNA.
Last month saw a breakthrough when scientists announced they've written almost the entire genome of baker's yeast, a big step because of the similarities between yeast and human cells.
We all know yeast is an important organism because it makes beer, it makes bread and wine and so on. So what might yeast 2.0 be good at making? It'll be useful for making any medicine that's now sourced from a plant. Any plant natural product, for example, could probably be made in a fermenter with brewing, and yeast 2.0 will make that process more reliable, more readily distributable.
Scientists are aiming to synthesize a human genome in the next 10 years. Synthetic biology, especially anything to do with food or the environment, does face criticism. But advocates say this is unfounded.
A lot of folks are concerned with things that you might take in. And would that change your DNA? Of course not. Now, you have your own DNA. If you eat an apple or Arctic apple, where we have silenced an enzyme so that when you slice the apple, it doesn't turn brown, you can eat that apple and it tastes as good as any other, and probably better.
Nevertheless, synthetic biology raises all sorts of ethical questions, and right now there is no proper structure to deal with that problem. The next part may come down to the public's appetite for tinkering with life.